This narrative is a character string generated by an AI large language model statistically arranging words, and its truthfulness has not been verified.
Such outputs without basis are called hallucinations. While confabulation more accurately reflects reality than hallucination, we follow convention.
Therefore, the content described has no relation whatsoever to any real persons, organizations, nations, or events.
All right, today we're going to break down a pretty unsettling macroeconomic theory. It's a theory that takes two incredibly powerful forces. I'm talking about sky-high interest rates and, yes, actual war, and argues that when you combine them, they create a chillingly rational strategy for national survival. And the whole idea really boils down to this one phrase, state machine maintenance. Now, to even begin to wrap our heads around this, we have to do something kind of difficult. We have to put ethics aside for a moment and just look at a nation as a cold, hard machine. A machine that, according to this theory, has to be maintained, no matter the human cost. So, what on earth does maintenance mean in this context? Well, it means using the combined pressure of high interest rates and war to literally purge an economy of everything that's considered inefficient. We're talking about stagnant companies, outdated industries, and even what the theory calls excess population. To really get this, you have to think in purely Machiavellian terms, It's that classic idea where the end justifies the means. The only goal that matters is the survival of the state, and things like conventional morality, well, they're seen as a luxury you can't afford. Now, let me be perfectly clear. We are not endorsing this in any way. We're just laying out the theory's internal logic. This brings us to the absolute core of the theory, this brutal synergy. It's about how raising interest rates and waging war aren't two separate things. No, they're designed to work together, to amplify each other's effects in a really powerful and, frankly, terrifying way. So this synergy is built on three main pillars. First, it's about figuring out how to fund a massive war without completely tanking your own currency. Second, it's about forcing a painful but necessary industrial upgrade. And third, it's about hitting a massive reset button on society itself. Let's dig into that first one, funding the war. Okay, so funding. You see, normally when a country goes to war, it just prints a ton of money. That leads to insane inflation, and pretty soon your currency is worthless. But this theory says no. You pair the war with ultra-high interest rates. This does two critical things. First, it keeps your currency strong, so you can still buy vital supplies from other countries. And second, it acts like a giant financial vacuum, forcing the public savings out of their bank accounts and into government bonds that pay for the entire war effort. Next up is that industrial update. Look, high interest rates are absolutely brutal for businesses. Those inefficient zombie companies that have been just limping along for years, they get wiped out almost overnight. At the same exact time, the war demands huge investment in critical sectors, military, tech, energy. It forces a complete reallocation of the nation's resources. And unemployment? According to the theory, it just vanishes. People are either drafted into the army or they're put to work building tanks and shells. The whole idea of surplus people is just erased. And that brings us to the third pillar, the societal reset. This is where the logic gets its most twisted. Because in this view, mass destruction isn't a tragedy, it's an opportunity. It's seen as the ultimate public works project. It literally bulldozes the old, outdated world, clearing the path for a brand new, modern reconstruction. And, of course, the massive economic boom that would follow. Okay, so this all sounds like a pretty abstract, dark thought experiment, right? But the source material actually applies it to a very real place, modern Japan, an economy that's been famously stuck in stagnation for decades. Now, from the cold, detached perspective of this theory, Japan's long era of peace and super low interest rates isn't a good thing. It's actually seen as a slow death, one that's draining the country of all its dynamism. So this radical shock therapy could be framed as a necessary evil, something needed to jolt the nation back to life. And what's the proposed shock? An interest rate of 5%. Now, to you and me, 5% might not sound crazy high. But for an economy like Japan's, which has had interest rates near zero for more than 20 years, a jump to 5% isn't just a policy change, it's a controlled demolition. It is an economic earthquake. The immediate fallout would be just catastrophic for a huge chunk of the population. Mortgages would default left and right, the real estate market would completely collapse, and this would trigger a massive transfer of wealth. The people who were sitting on cash could swoop in and buy up all these devalued assets for pennies on the dollar, creating a stark new line between the economic winners and the losers. And this is where you really see the human cost. It's all laid out. The people who might be considered surplus in a peaceful economy, the young, the old, the unemployed, they're suddenly given a mandatory new role. They are forcibly integrated into the war machine, either as soldiers, support staff, or factory workers. In this system, everyone gets a purpose, whether they like it or not. But, and this is a huge but, for all of its cold mechanical logic, the entire theory hinges on one final ultimate gamble. There's a single terrifying flaw that just might undermine the whole thing. And this is the critical flaw, right in this one sentence. There is no guarantee that you, yourself, are not part of these surplus resources to be cleaned up. Think about that. In a system that's designed to purge everything inefficient, you have absolutely no way of knowing if you, or your family, or your business will be the one that ends up on the chopping block. So that leaves us with the final haunting question. Is this a rational, if unbelievably brutal, path to ensuring a nation's survival? Or is it just a high-stakes gamble where the price of losing isn't just economic ruin, but an existential threat to every single person living in that state? And the answer to that? Well, that's not clear at all.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Usually we're here to talk about, innovation or history, maybe some subtle social trends.
Looking for the signal in the noise.
Exactly. But today the signal we're looking at is, well, it's loud, it's distinct, and frankly, it's absolutely terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at this thought experiment that treats a country not as a community of people, but as a machine.
Yeah.
A machine that's breaking down and needs maintenance.
And the maintenance manual for this particular machine is not something you'd find at a hardware store. It's more of a horror story, really, for anyone who cares about, individual safety.
It really is. We're digging into a source. It's a kind of Machiavellian optimization solution that proposes a scenario where a country uses this very specific, almost forbidden combination of tools to fix its economy.
And those tools are interest rate hikes and war.
That synergy it shouldn't exist.
Right. In standard economic theory, that's oil and water. You usually get one or the other. But this source, it argues that if you mix them just right, you get a hard reset for a nation.
A hard reset.
Yeah. It claims this cocktail can fix currency issues, it can cure industrial stagnation, and it even solves the problem of surplus population.
That phrase alone, surplus population, it just gives you a sense of how cold this document is.
It is cold.
So our mission today is to unpack this logic. And to be clear, we are not endorsing it, obviously.
No.
But we need to understand the mechanics of it, because it forces you to look at the economy in a way we usually try to avoid.
As a system where human safety is just another variable.
Yeah, a variable that can be traded for efficiency.
Precisely. The source calls this whole thing the synergy of drastic medicine. And the first pill they want the patient to swallow is that interest rate hike.
Okay, let's start there, because this is where the standard model in my head just breaks down. I think most of us have this idea that war is expensive.
Very.
And historically, when a country goes to war, the playbook is simple. You need money for tanks, for soldiers, so you print money, you keep rates low so the government can borrow cheap, and the result is almost always massive inflation.
That's the classic Keynesian war economy. You basically inflate away your debt. We saw it in World War II and Vietnam.
Right.
But this source, it completely flips the script. It suggests a scenario where a nation goes to war, but at the same time, it jacks interest rates up to ultra-high levels.
Which sounds, that sounds suicidal. If you're fighting a war, you need your economy humming. Why would you strangle your own industries with high borrowing costs right when you need them the most?
To protect the currency. That's the whole insight here. In a modern globalized conflict, you can't survive on a worthless currency. You need to import energy. You need raw materials. You might need high-end semiconductors that you don't make at home.
And if you're just printing money, your currency collapses, your supply chain gets cut off. You can't buy the oil to fuel the tanks.
Exactly. So the high interest rates, they act as a kind of shield. They keep the currency strong enough to maintain purchasing power on the global market.
It's a signal to the world that our money is still good. It has yield.
But there's a secondary function to these high rates that's, it's much more predatory. It's not just about international trade. It's about domestic control. The source describes it as a way to forcefully suck up the savings of your own citizens.
This is the bait mechanism we talked about. This part really got me.
Right. Just, think about the psychology of a population during wartime. There's a lot of uncertainty. Stock market's probably a mess. People are scared. They want safety.
Of course.
So if the government offers bonds with a massive yield, say 5, 7, maybe even 10%, because of those high rates, where does all the money go?
Straight into government coffers. If I'm sitting on cash and the bank is offering me nothing, I might hide it under the mattress. But if the government says, hey, give us your money, we'll guarantee a huge return, I hand it over.
You hand it over willingly. This is the optimization part. Instead of confiscating wealth through taxes, which, causes riots, or inflating it away, which causes a collapse, they use greed, or maybe just the need for security, to transfer private wealth to the public war chest. It drains the private sector and pumps it right into the military-industrial complex.
It's so efficient, it's diabolical. It turns the citizens into financiers of their own potential destruction, and they think they're making a smart investment.
Yep. You're sitting there looking at your bond yield thinking, I'm making a killing, while the government is using that cash to build the machine that might just send you to the front.
And that's just the financial plumbing that keeps the lights on.
Right.
Where this theory really shifts from, cynical fiscal policy to structural horror is when we look at what this combination does to the actual industries inside the country. The source calls it forced industrial evolution.
Or the cleaning.
The cleaning. Again, terrible branding, but very effective imagery. It implies there's, dirt that needs to be washed away.
And it builds on this concept of zombie companies. The type firms that aren't really innovating or growing, they're just making enough cash to pay the interest on their debts.
Yeah, in a low interest rate world like we've had for a decade, these companies can just survive forever. They clog up the system, they hoard talent and capital that could be used somewhere better.
They're the walking dead of the corporate world.
But they employ people, they provide some stability. They're the local business that's been around for 50 years but hasn't really changed its model since 1990.
Well, stability is the enemy of this theory. The source basically argues that stability is just stagnation in disguise. So when you trigger that huge interest rate hike, the cost of their debt skyrockets.
And the zombie companies.
They can't pay. They implode almost instantly.
So you trigger a massive wave of bankruptcies. In a normal timeline, that's a recession. That's a disaster. That's politicians losing elections.
In peacetime, yes, it's a depression. But remember the synergy. We're at war. So while the high rates are, incinerating the service sector and the inefficient old companies, the state is pouring all that sucked up capital
into military tech, energy production, logistics.
Exactly. It's a forced reallocation.
Yeah.
You're not just killing companies. You are physically moving the resources. You're taking capital, land, and energy away from frivolous things like luxury goods or entertainment and forcing it all into survival industries.
It's an industrial update at gunpoint.
That's a good way to put it. The source argues this creates a survival of the fittest environment that accelerates innovation at a pace you could never match in peacetime. If you don't innovate, you die. If you aren't essential to the state, you go bankrupt.
It strips the economy of all its fat and builds nothing but muscle. But we have to talk about the human cost here. You can move capital with a keystroke. You can't just reallocate people without massive suffering. If you bankrupt the entire service sector, you have millions of unemployed. The waitress, the middle manager, they're all out on the street.
Well, the source has a very great answer for that, too. It argues that this scenario completely eliminates the concept of unemployment. It solves the labor surplus problem.
And I'm guessing we are not talking about a universal basic income here.
No. We are talking about conscription. The surplus humans, and I want to be really clear, that's the source's term, not mine, who lose their jobs in this recession are just absorbed by the war machine.
So the inefficiency of unemployment is solved by the efficiency of the draft.
Right. You lose your job at the zombie company, and the government hands you a rifle or wrench.
Or sends you to a munitions factory.
Exactly. The source is blunt about it. Full employment is achieved not by creating nice jobs, but by necessity. The problem of what do we do with all these people is just solved by the war. It treats the labor force like any other raw material, like steel or oil. If you have too much of it sitting idle, you find a use for it.
It's chilling. It solves the math of the economy, but it totally ignores the life of the economy. It's optimizing for the state, not the citizen.
That is the core of this Machiavellian optimization. It views the state as the only thing that matters. Individuals are just components. And sometimes, components need to be replaced.
Or recycled. Speaking of recycling, let's move to the physical side of this. We've covered money and jobs, but war means destruction. Physical destruction of cities, infrastructure, homes.
Yeah.
Most of us see that as the ultimate loss of value. A bridge gets blown up, that's a net loss for society.
Yeah.
But this source, it spins it as a gain.
It refers to destruction as the ultimate public works project.
Okay, that requires some mental gymnastics.
Mm-hmm.
How is a leveled city a positive economic indicator?
You have to look at it through this cold lens of the sunk cost fallacy and urban planning. Think about an old city. The infrastructure is crumbling, the roads are too narrow, the power grid is obsolete.
The zoning laws make it impossible to build anything new.
Right. In peacetime, modernizing a city is a nightmare. It takes decades of lawsuits, eminent domain battles, heritage rules.
You can't just bulldoze a neighborhood because the sewer system is from 1950. People live there, they have rights.
But war acts as a reset button. The source argues that physical destruction cleans the old urban structures. It removes the shackles of the past. It sounds horrific, but the economic argument is that once the bombs stop, you have a burned field, a blank slate.
So you don't retrofit, you rebuild everything from scratch.
Exactly. And you rebuild using the absolute latest technology. You install the newest power grids, the newest transport networks, the most efficient housing. The theory is that after the economy has been cooled down by the high rates and destruction, the massive demand for rebuilding creates an explosive economic restart.
It's the phoenix rising from the ashes idea. But the implication is you need the fire. You can't get that kind of growth without the destruction first because all the old stuff is in the way.
That is the argument. Destruction as a prerequisite for creation. It reignites the economy with a level of demand you simply cannot manufacture in peacetime.
Right, you can't just pass a bill to demolish half the country to stimulate the construction sector.
But an enemy airstrike does it for you.
So, if we recap the formula so far, bankrupt the weak companies with high rates, draft the unemployed to solve the labor surplus, protect your currency to keep imports flowing, and then use the physical destruction of the war to create a construction boom.
That is the machine. A complete cycle of destruction and rebirth managed by the state.
Now, up to this point, this is all, a theoretical model. It could be any country. It sounds like something out of a sci-fi novel. But the source actually applies this lens to a specific place. It calls it the Japan hypothesis.
Yes. This is where the theory moves from the abstract to the concrete. It looks at modern-day Japan, an aging society, low birth rate, decades of stagnation, and it asks, what would this Machiavellian solution look like here?
And it gets very specific. It starts with a number, an interest rate of 5%.
Right. Now, for listeners in the U.S. or Europe, 5% might sound pretty normal. But for listeners who follow the Bank of Japan, rates there have been near zero or even negative for a very, very long time.
The whole economy is built on cheap money.
The entire economy. A sudden jump to 5% isn't just a policy change, it's a seismic shock.
What happens to the average person in Japan in that scenario? Because people have built their whole lives around those low rates.
The source predicts an immediate catastrophic collapse of the real estate bubble. If you have a variable rate mortgage in Tokyo and your rate suddenly jumps to 5%, your monthly payment just explodes. You're probably finished.
You can't service the debt?
Nope. The source uses the term mortgage refugees.
Which implies people losing their homes en masse. You'd create a homeless crisis instantly.
Yes, and a liquidity crisis for households.
Yeah.
And who wins in that scenario? The strong.
Mm-hmm.
The people holding cash. They can swoop in and buy up assets, land, buildings, companies at rock-bottom prices.
It concentrates wealth. It wipes out the middle-class homeowner to clear the board for the next phase.
Exactly.
But Japan has that other unique problem, the demographics. It's the oldest society in the world. How does the war part of the equation handle a population that's largely elderly?
Ruthlessly. The source argues that an aging society creates a surplus of people who are consuming resources but not actively producing. Again, looking at it through the cold logic of the machine.
Right.
Under a war footing, that changes.
You can't send grandmothers to the front line. That makes no military sense.
No, but you can mobilize the entire population in other ways. The source suggests that total war acts as a demographic corrective. The youth are sent to the front. The elderly are moved into rear support, logistics, maybe even local defense. The idea is that no one is left unused.
The surplus is mobilized.
It treats the demographic pyramid like a resource chart. We have too many people in this age bracket, okay? Shift them to this function. It creates a sense of national utility for everyone, but at the cost of retirement, safety, peace.
Yeah.
And I have to point out the narrative shift here. The source includes this really striking perspective. It says, peace and low interest rates are driving Japan to a slow death.
A slow death. That's a heavy phrase. It suggests that the safety and stability people have right now are actually bad things.
It frames the current situation, the stagnation, the safety, the status quo, as a coma, a comfortable warm bath where the water is slowly getting cold. And in that view, this horrific word hike combo is seen as shock therapy.
The defibrillator.
It's the defibrillator. It hurts, it burns, it might kill the patient, but it's the only thing that might wake them up.
And that's the seduction of extreme ideologies, isn't it? They take a real problem, stagnation, a feeling the future is shrinking, and they offer a solution that is technically efficient but morally bankrupt.
It appeals to that part of us that just wants a hard reset. We look at the gridlock of modern politics and think, if we could just sweep it all away and start over. This source says, okay, here is the broom. The broom is war.
Which brings us to the most critical part of this whole thing. We've been talking about the system, the state, the economy, looking at it from 30,000 feet. But the source ends with a massive caveat, a reality check that kind of undermines the whole rational argument.
The human gamble.
Yes, because while this might be rational for the abstract idea of the state, it is a terrifying gamble for the individual.
The source had a quote that really stuck with me. It said, there is no guarantee that you yourself won't be included in the surplus resources being cleaned up.
That is the crux of it. It's easy to sit here and talk about cleaning up inefficient industries, and you nod and you say, sure, efficiency is good, but you might be the owner of that inefficient business.
Right.
You might be the person who poured their life savings into a little shop that the machine decides isn't necessary anymore.
Or, when you hear about correcting the real estate market, you might agree in principle that prices are too high, but you might be the mortgage refugee losing your home. You might be the one on the street.
And when you hear about mobilizing the surplus population,
Right.
well, you might be the one sent to the front lines. Or your children.
Exactly. The machine doesn't care which part gets scrapped and which part gets upgraded. It just cares that the machine keeps running. The rational choice for the state is often the fatal choice for the individual. And that's the flaw in the logic.
It assumes that the state is an entity worth saving, even if it has to crush the people who make it up.
It shows us the extreme end of macroeconomic thinking. When you zoom out far enough, human suffering just looks like structural adjustment. It looks like data points on a chart correcting themselves.
And if you're the data point being corrected, the efficiency of the system is absolutely no comfort to you.
Not at all.
So why does this matter? Why spend all this time analyzing a dystopian thought experiment about a hypothetical war economy?
I think it matters because it forces us to confront our own frustrations. We all complain about the slow death. We complain about gridlock, about nothing changing, about the economy feeling stuck. We sort of romanticize the hard reset.
Yeah, we see it in movies, we hear it in political rhetoric. We want the benefits of the ultimate public works project without the bombs. We want the efficiency without the suffering.
We want the clean slate without the fire.
Exactly.
But this source reminds us that the hard reset comes with a price tag that's paid in human lives. The alternative to the slow death isn't necessarily a quick rebirth. It might just be a violent death.
So it challenges us to find a middle path. How do we innovate and grow without treating people like fuel for the engine?
It's a very sobering thought. We want efficiency, but maybe inefficiency. You know, the messiness of peace, the safety nets that keep zombie companies alive, the slow pace of urban planning. Maybe that's actually the luxury of a civilized society.
Maybe we should appreciate the clutter a little bit more.
It forces us to ask, what are we optimizing for? Are we optimizing for the strength of the nation state, or are we optimizing for the well-being of the people living in it? This source material proves those two goals are not always the same.
In fact, under this model, they're diametrically opposed.
Right. It's the difference between being the mechanic and being the engine part. The mechanic just wants the car to run fast. The engine part just doesn't want to melt.
And this strategy runs the engine red hot until it melts down and reforms into something new.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm looking at my low-interest savings account a little differently now. It might not be making much, but at least it's not bait for a war bond.
That's a very healthy perspective. Sometimes boring is good. In finance, boring is usually safe.
Boring is very good. This has been a heavy one, but a necessary one. It's fascinating to see how logic, when you take it to its absolute extreme without any empathy, becomes something monstrous.
It's the ultimate cautionary tale of economic rationality. It shows that logic without ethics isn't wisdom, it's just a weapon.
We're going to wrap it up there. We've unpacked the machine, the bait, the cleaning, and the gamble.
A terrifying efficiency.
Indeed. I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. We often feel frustrated by the status quo. We feel like things are stagnating. But if the only alternative to that stagnation is this kind of ruthless efficiency, a system that views you as a surplus resource to be spent, is the slow death actually a luxury? Or are we all just sitting around waiting for a reset button that we can't control?
Something to think about.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.